Hello again, and thank you everybody for joining us on the Gaming News Canada show. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Last week brought a bit of a blizzard of coverage in mainstream media about the business of sports betting and concerns about the amount of advertising in the online gambling space. The Globe and Mail on its editorial page called for the federal government to follow the Senate's lead and quickly pass Bill S-269 to create a national framework for sports betting advertising. An edition of the CBC radio show The Current spoke with a gambling addict who referred to online betting as, quote, a racetrack in my pocket for 24/7, and a subsequent story on CBC.ca referenced a recent report by the medical journal The Lancet's Commission on Gambling Calls, sounding the alarm for governments to approach gambling as a public health issue. Also, inside the Insight section of Sunday's Toronto Star, there was a full-page feature from a couple of Associated Press reporters on a government crackdown on sportsbooks in Brazil's booming gambling market. The Globe and CBC's coverage included some outdated research, which was pointed out in Dave Briggs's Canadian Content newsletter late last week. Those pieces, along with the passing of Bill S-269, had taken place at the same time that the Canadian Gaming Association has released the results of a study by MediaRadar, a North American advertising intelligence company. So to get the industry's thoughts on the latest concerns about advertising and problem gambling, we invited back to the podcast the president and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, Paul Burns. Paul, never a dull moment in the industry, but obviously there's a lot going on right now, and given the coverage last week combined with the research that was, I believe, commissioned by the CGA through MediaRadar, I figured this was a good time to get you back on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always great to be here.
Hey, Paul, just to riff off a little bit. Dave Briggs and I actually exchanged emails last week, and I mentioned to Dave that I consider myself to be was a member of the mainstream media for more than a quarter of a century. Still a very strong advocate for traditional media, but I do have to say I think both the Globe Mail editorial and the CBC current piece did fall a little bit short of doing due diligence, and the Globe piece in particular, where it referenced a number of operators in the Ontario regulated market right now using referencing another, I think maybe the Canadian Association of Mental Health from December 2023, when that information is easily found on the iGaming Ontario website. And I think they also reference the research that was done together by the CBC and Bristol University a year or so ago that, again, there's some, I guess, there's some of the research was of the dubious variety. I guess that's the best way to put it.
That's a fair comment.
Is that
That's
is
a
it the
fair
case?
comment.
Yeah. When this coverage comes out, Paul, does your inbox get flooded with emails from members and texts and again, I'm just curious, did the Globe and the Current reach out to you with these two particular pieces of
Okay.
journalism?
No. The Globe and Mail, this is probably their third or fourth editorial. They've referenced this need for um, gaming advertising to follow the guidelines for the CRTC guidelines for alcohol. They clearly haven't read them because they actually read very similar. That there are standards, and not just in Ontario, and a lot of this focus has been on Ontario because that's where a lot of the ads were generated from. But every province has a set of advertising standards, and have had them for decades because gaming has been around for 40 years in a widespread format in Canada. So it's like, do a little research and ask a few people and find out what's going on, because a lot of the regulators across the country, those alcohol standards were probably written in the 90s. A lot of that fell out of, and there's mirroring regulatory standards for alcohol in every province that follow a lot of those same guidelines too, obviously. but that's where the gaming ones came from as well. And that sense of urgency, call to action, all of those things that you can't do in an ad, they've been around for years. And it's just take a few minutes and ask somebody about what's going on, please. Because this assumption that there's no rules has been permeating the debate in the media since 2022. And a lot of this stuff is just not either it's false, it's misleading. And I don't know whether they don't bother to research and understand because they've been told more than once that this stuff isn't right, what they're saying, and it's misleading because there are lots of rules. Even Senator Deakin, when she launched her bill, talked about the need for rules. There's rules because gaming has been a provincial oversight since the mid-'80s, and that's where the rules lie. And we have two other organizations, one, Think TV, which has a robust set of rules that review every ad that goes on television to their standards, which meet every regulatory standard in the country, and then some. And now we have ad standards who have always had an ad code of advertising in their. So there's been a whole ecosystem of rules and oversight. And I don't know what everybody is like. What they're really trying to do, I think, is curtail volume and ban advertising, and they just don't want to say it. And if you want to do that, then say so. But the reality is, there are lots of rules, and there's lots of oversight, and they've been around for decades. And that's really what the fortunate part is. Like, as I said, we posted on LinkedIn and took apart the Globe editorial sentence by sentence. And it's like, it's disappointing that they don't bother to ask or to do any research. And that's, it's at least the current got a statement from the AGCO, which I think was informative on what they replied with, because it talked about one of the particular parts of the regulatory standards that exist around monitoring player play and the level of interactions per month that the industry is having on the online space is telling that the regulatory oversight is being monitored and it works. But this is the frustrating part, is the assumption that there's just nothing being done. And the fact is that in comparing us to other jurisdictions for reasons I still don't understand, because our commitment to responsible gaming far outstrips what's occurred in the UK or many other countries in the world, because it's been a part of the language and operating mind of this industry since the mid-'90s when it started to expand in Canada. And so that's the frustrating part, is that I guess we expected more, but now I guess we shouldn't expect anything from anybody.
I think when we look at when you reference the numbers around the increase of calls to problem gambling hotlines, Paul, that's something that you and I have talked about in the past, and that it's obviously it's a great thing that there is an awareness around Connects Ontario now, and I think even there CAMH, I think there's just a lot more awareness in general that there are places to go for help now, and that includes the operators, correct?
Well, the operators are there to ensure that there's the players are awareness of and aware and have knowledge and access to tools that'll
Right.
help them manage their play and information. Two, then it's if they feel they have problems, it's that 1-800 Connects number in Ontario, in particular, that's been in every ad that's been on the air, by the way, which has given them billions of impressions compared to what it was pre-April of 2022. So we're not surprised that there's been increased calls because that's what you want, right? Is that why we put the number out there, is people to use it, and getting information and knowing where to go if they think they need help. I think it's great that the people have called because we know that was the industry and Think TV working together, putting that number in every one of the ads and appearing even in digital advertising, and that is there. Whether it's the connects.ca or the connects 1-800, it's in every ad. And so, yeah, I expected people to call because they know about it now. And I think that that's it's a positive as it, and we're seeing even uptake in um, players using the tools that operators are required to provide. But this is the thing that everybody um, is. A lot of people will poke at one thing or another thing, and the fact is that every regime in any province, it's the totality of the regulatory standards and other policies and RG commitment that make up that the level of and regime that helps provide protection for players and access and knowing where they can get help when they need it. This industry, we all know, and we all say we know that people have control issues with our product. We're not in denial. The amount of money, effort, and time the industry spends to ensure that we can provide a healthier environment for players to play is extraordinary. In this country, we've done exceptional things, and so the reality is that, and we even have a public health approach. This is the part that is, we've taken a public health approach, and in combining with working with industry, but it's not what there's certain groups would like other things, and that's fine. They can let's have the debate, but let's have it in an honest fashion about
Well,
understanding what's actually occurring.
yeah, before we get into the media radar research, just two more questions or issues I want to bring up. And again, reading some of the coverage over the past week, again, that, with the allegations that sports books are targeting youth and that the commercials are targeting youth. And um, again, I'm not an apologist for the gambling industry. I'm not a I'm not a shill for what the industry does. Um, but the thought that a 14-year-old kid can go and get a FanDuel or BetMGM account, that's just plain wrong, unless a
Mhm.
parent or Uncle Frank is aiding that child to do that.
Yeah, and that's the one of the pieces of the puzzle that make up a total regime that help protect people. And like ads don't target minors. That's not. Maybe people have opinions on what they think they do, but the reality is that there is a set of regulatory standards. Think TV views every ad that goes on television, just for those types of things. And they don't just look at scripts and other things. They look at the visual cues when they review ads. And so no, the industry doesn't target minors, and we don't want minors on our site. We don't want parents opening accounts for their kids. That's just wrong. And so I think that what we've seen, and there has been no either self-reported by an operator or found of a minor accessing an Ontario regulated site, and that's why we need expansion of regulated markets in this country, because there are places where minors may get access outside the regulatory regime. That's the important part of playing on a site that has a proper regulatory, logo stamp on it, like iGO's. Um, and that's why we um, want more jurisdictions to do this, because that's what Ontario led with when they moved forward. They said we want a greater consumer protection measures because we know that there's people out there and there's problems. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, and there's lots of places people can get access to. And we don't. Canada isn't into blocking IPs and banning us. That's not what um, we've chosen to do in this country. And so, in that regard, then we need to create environments where people know that there are a strong level of consumer protection and oversight and monitoring, and that's what we have. And that's why, and it's an existence like that. Online sports betting and online gaming didn't exist before April 2022. There's a lot of that going around too, and we know that there was billions of dollars leaving this country, and so to assume that all of this is brand new is also wrong, and so that's an understanding and spending. There's a lot of research rolling around Even, lottery corporations' annual reports for years talked about the size of the gray markets and their jurisdictions, let alone other organizations like H2 and others that have put out statements in their research of where the size of gray markets, unregulated markets in Canada. So it's eyes wide open. This is, we're trying to, industry wants to become part of a regulatory oversight, and those levels that are in Ontario standards, which are some of the most stringent in the world, should be applauded and welcome, because it's providing that oversight and knowing that minors won't get access, and that there are ways for players to be monitored and safeguards in the system. And those things aren't done. Monitoring player play is not even, is some other jurisdictions are just in Canada are just starting to explore. So there's a better need for understanding and an honest conversation, because the industry isn't in denial. The industry isn't running from anything. We know that players have control issues with our products. We've been very outwardly, and that's why there's a lot of time, effort, money put into providing tools and mechanisms to better safeguard players.
The Senate bill, Paul, gives the feds a year to negotiate national standards for advertising with the provinces and territories, and developing a plan for implementing those standards across the country. I mean, that appears to be a quite a daunting, if not impossible, ask. Just your thoughts on that.
Well, one of the things I said when I was in front of the Senate, I appeared with Catherine McLeod from Think TV on October 1st, is that we don't think this bill is necessary, because a lot of what they are wanting it to do is already being done. And the reality is that there's a very high level of oversight and standards from the provincial gaming regulators. There is already, from an advertising point of view, organizations like Think TV that already approve and have gambling related standards for broadcasts. And that's, like, let's be honest, the only federal government can regulate and oversee from the CRTC, which is radio and television. So it's already being done. And so there's nothing, what we don't think is what's sort of productive in this bill is that creating another layer of rules in another government isn't gonna, it'll maybe make some people feel nice, but is it gonna change the fact that we already have a very effective regime in place? And that was what Catherine and I were trying to explain to the Senate, was that look at what's being done. Like, Think TV is expanding even into streaming services, because lo and behold, they're coming around with commercials and starting to look at cable television. So she's going to start, and through Think is going to start reviewing ads for streaming. And so, no one had to ask or force them to do that. There was a recognition industry part that they saw this coming and they took action. And so that's why we say it's like, you can talk about all of this stuff. And even from the research side, that there's, organizations like GRIO, the Canadian Centre for Substance Abuse, and others that have been involved in research, and the cooperation of the Partnership for Responsible Gaming, which is the lottery corporations, has been in existence for better part of a decade. A lot of it already exists. And so going through an exercise that the federal government is wading into provincial territory, it seems kind of fruitless. And I think there's a lot of people in some in the Senate, I think, saw it, and I think that the Parliament will. It's nice idea, but the effectiveness of this is that there's a lot already being done.
So it's not like the relationship between the feds and the provinces is all that cozy these days either, and there seem to be much more serious issues that need to be negotiated between the provinces and federals beyond this bill.
Even the CRTC and Harris Canada weren't not terribly interested in taking on this because they see what's being done. They work with organizations like Think TV and Ad Standards. And so they were quite direct in what they felt, looking at the codes in place, that they could, look to enforce those codes, but those codes are being enforced by those agencies. So there was no one identified a real hole anywhere, to be blunt. I think there's a lot of people that would like to see the federal government put some money to some things, and I think maybe there was some wishes that maybe there's pots of funding in places that they could get out of this. Well, that's hard to say. The federal government does make a fair bit of money from gambling, but they whether they choose to invest in this that's a whole other question, separate from this bill.
I'll just add just one more point on the Globe's coverage. I mean, it was kind of ironic when I read the editorial on the Globe's website last week. There were 3 OLG ads on the page with the editorial. So anyway, I want to get into the MediaRadar data because there's some actual numbers here, and run through a few of these stats, Paul, and then I'll let you weigh in. And the intelligence that MediaRadar revealed, shows that total media ad spend has declined 7% year over year. This is from 2023 to 2022 for online casino and sports betting, and that comes after 4 years of increases, which would have gone back before the Ontario market was regulated, and Bill C318, right? Boy, it's hard to remember the 218. It's hard to remember now to go back. That's too many bills ago.
Yes.
In the final third quarter of 2023, which is considered to be the peak sports season, there was a 15% decrease in television ad spend versus the same period in 2022. Television continues to be the main driver of activity for online gaming. In 2023, television made up about 73% of total ad spend for online gambling, with about $140 million. That's a 2% increase over 2022, suggesting that activity was beginning to slow. And Paul, that's something we did talk about back in 2023, and we could see that drop off in comparison to when the market opened in April 2022, where there was a flurry of advertising spend. Compared to all of other activity in Canada, online gaming only represents 5% of total TV ad spend and 2% of all TV ad occurrences in 2023. And finally,
Which shows they pay a lot for their ads.
Yes.
They pay more for their ads. That's partly what that shows too.
Yeah. And again, when you talk about the CRTC, I mean, I would think Bell Media and Rogers are going to yell bloody murder if all of a sudden those revenue opportunities no longer there from the operators, because coming out of a pandemic, as we've said many times in this forum and in the former newsletter, this industry was a bit of a lifeline to the media industry. This is also an important point, and then I'll turn it over to you. When compared to other key categories, online gaming represents an 8% share of total media ad spend in 2023. Automotive, financial insurance, and fast food all have significantly higher spend than online gaming for both total media. Pharma also has a higher total media spend than online gambling. And that goes back, Paul, I think to when 2022 when I had COVID and did the unscientific audit of a hockey night in Canada broadcast, and those numbers basically line up with what I recorded that night. Only give MediaRadar a lot more credit. I'm sure they did a lot more due diligence than I did sitting on my couch that night. But I'll turn over to you. What else sticks out to you from this research?
Well, why we did it was also to say that there's been lots of adjectives about inundated, tsunami, all of these lovely terms. But did anybody actually know how many? No. So we thought we'd ask. Because what we know is that the other group in this, which we talked about oversight of reviewing of ads and other things meeting standards, it's professional sports leagues that put boundaries around how much advertising and how advertising can interact with the product. and so there's been that is also was done preemptively. Broadcasters, particularly the NHL and Rogers, from last season, not the current one, put in a 15% cap, which I don't believe they ever hit in terms of ads on any given broadcast. Even the Bristol Research, when you dig into their numbers after they stopped counting and freeze framing and counting every logo they could see on the screen, 6% of what they counted, only 6, were traditional 30-second TV commercials or in broadcast activations. So the reality is that you can count a lot of logos and others. That's nice, but that's not a call to action. That's not an ad. In the same way, a 30-second ad is more of a call to action for somebody. So it lines up. And what we've seen, though, is that there was a newness to this. This goes back to why people notice. There's a newness. As Kevin Galloway from the Canadian Broadcasters Association said in front of the Senate committee, if you took pickup truck ads off the air for 2 years and then put them back on at their current rate, people go, there's a lot of pickup truck ads on television. Because when there are a lot more, you're 3 times more likely to see an automotive ad than you are a gambling ad. And same with financial services. Both sectors, 3 times higher. It's just trying to provide perspective. Advertising is done within a certain parameter of rules and boundaries. The market was clearly, because it was rather competitive when it started, we knew there would be lots of advertising, and there has been. But there's also shows that there's been gambling advertising pre-2022, and lots of it. And so for us, it was just a chance to put all of this together and say, okay, here's what we are dealing with here. 2% of all advertising occurrences on television represent gaming ads. And total media spend, it's like we're not there. And this doesn't include lotteries, because we took out and we just said, okay, let's deal with the casino products and sports betting products. And so when we did this, it was trying to provide a very accurate picture to everybody to understand that let's have a conversation if you want to have it about this. But here is reality. It's like, and we dug into some other pieces as we saw through this process, and you'd see like live sports didn't even come into the top 10 of programming for advertising. For those that had gambling advertising in them, it wasn't in live sports, because there are boundaries that leagues and broadcasters set around those products. And so, what we saw was the initial euphoria of the Ontario market opening and lots of brands establishing presence. But the leveling off started to occur, and it has dropped off and decreased as people establish brand and other things, and then they move on looking to more, in some cases, cost-effective ways to promote their products and interact with customers. But you hit, all the high points. And when we showed, like, within NHL broadcasts and NBA broadcasts, it's like 6% and 4%. That's what, that's just so everybody has an understanding of what they're seeing. And so that's why it was important to have this, is to stop, everybody thinks there is, because there's a newness to this. In reality, you're more likely to see a lot more other products advertised. And I think that's what we're trying to just say, here's the information. And people can, but it's, whether they want to see them or not. And there's a lot of people, even Ad Standards Canada, who receives complaints about advertising in Canada. The first year, 2022, they got about 100 complaints about advertising. And most of them were, why am I seeing these?
Right.
It wasn't about the content. There's no action on content has happened on an ad. And Catherine, it's like an understanding, and this people like to compare to other jurisdictions. So Catherine McLeod went on in front of the Senate committee, without no one really bothering to follow up when she stated this, A lot of the ads that are in the UK would never get approved to be on television in Canada.
Yeah, and I
They
think
still offer bonus. They still offer bonusing incentive in their advertising. There's still a lot of other rules that are in place in Canada that we have higher standards than they do, and everybody seems to be holding them out as some great model to be emulated. And in fact, we're doing much more than they are.
I think, and we've seen a shift in the type of advertising too, right? Paul, like sports interaction. We had Michael Zitney on the podcast a couple of weeks ago before the primetime conference, and talked about the ads where they've got their, some Joe Schmo making fun of hockey fans in the U.S. about their lack of knowledge about hockey, and they've got a responsible gambling commercial now with Mitch Marner, where Marner's just basically juggling a ball on a stick. Tom Burdicken was also on the same podcast from FanDuel and mentioned that FanDuel's 20% of their ad spends around responsible gambling. The other thing we'll point out, and again, this is something that you've mentioned here before, as it relates not just to television but also social media, is that young people don't watch commercials. I mean, we pretty certain now, and I can speak anecdotally as someone who's coached teenage kids in hockey and who has three children in their early 30s and late 20s, that they're following sports now on Instagram or Twitter or their TikTok. They're watching highlights. Like my kids aren't sitting and watching a 2.5, 3 hour hockey broadcast on a Saturday night. So again, I think the whole notion that sports betting ads on Hockey Night in Canada are targeting young people, I don't believe that.
Well, one is that young people, you're right, aren't watching it, and that was the other point Catherine made a very good point of in front of the Senate, is under 18s aren't watching television. And like they didn't they don't even index to the level of the population. So there's about under 18s represent, I think, 16 to 18% of the population. Most of those sports broadcasts don't get there. They don't get, under 18s representing 18% of their audience. It's not even close in many cases. And that was to the point where a numerator, which collects advertising or collects viewer data, is stopping collecting data on under 18s because one, it's hard to collect. Two, no one really wants it. So from a business decision, they're not collecting data on kids and watching television anymore, which is pretty telling. And that said, it doesn't lessen the need to ensure we're diligent with our regulatory standards. But it's also important upon all of us to understand, is when you look at the jurisdictions, and this is why there's a piece of research that was done with Dr. Cleo Flander, and in partnership with Ehlers and Krichak, that we did and we released earlier a few months ago, a month or so ago, because Dr. Flander appealed in front of the Senate as well. And part of that, why we did that study, is we benchmarked Ontario's regulatory standards against 4 other jurisdictions, 2 in the U.S., 2 in there, in which they very, very strong set of standards. But 2, I also did kind of a review of literature around studying the impacts of advertising, particularly on young people. And what we don't have is much research in North America, and virtually none in Canada. And to say, because of a research paper was done with British youth on British television, that we should just pick up or Australian youth and Australian television, it's applicable here. It's not. Our gaming markets are very different. Our histories are very different. And what he cautioned about in the paper was that regulatory and legislative action has far outstripped the research of saying, what are we doing? So countries have banned advertising. Now, the reality is that there's no magic bullet when it comes to dealing with problem gambling. If we just did X, it would go away. well, whatever that X is, do you think we would have found it by now and done it? Probably. It's the totality of this regime I talk about, of having all of the pieces that gives you strong oversight and higher levels of protection. And that's something that I think that's needs to be recognized, that that's what it takes. If you just ban advertising, is it going to make the problem go away? No, it won't. And if you think it does, you're wrong and ill-informed. And that's why I think the gambling research community has a lot to tell us too, and we have stuff to learn from. But we need to work with the research community, because we also need research that's going to be that is applicable and effective for industry then to act on. And that's something it's slowly getting better, but it's not there yet. There's a lot of partnerships with industry and on research and stuff. Some part of the research communities, poo-poo that and say that's not, we shouldn't be doing that. Well, in the the Lancet piece about, we said that industry shouldn't be involved at all. Well, in fact, you want the subject matter experts and you want to work together, because the industry is more than happy to work with folks to ensure that we have strong levels of consumer protection.
It'd be like having doing something on automobile safety, not talking to Ford, Toyota, and GM, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
yeah. I mean, that's yeah, Paul. Again, you and I, we've talked offline about this. We've talked in this forum about that, but I think that's a big issue right now. Is we haven't seen enough research, and anytime we do see research reference in something, it's outdated research. Who is that incumbent upon to, a to get the research, and two, to make sure the research is being made public.
Well, I think this is, and there are organizations that are out there that are doing some good work. Let's be honest. It's not that it's not being done. But when we look at, Bristol University research, for example, and the fact the CDC paid for somebody to count logos in a recorded broadcast and assume that it's, and then made their assumptions, without on reach and impact, or if an ad was against somebody's standards by their own version. It doesn't help the debate, right? It doesn't move things along. It actually, it creates more concern than it does help anything, in my opinion, because there is still a perception around gambling that if you gamble, it's bad, it's not productive, it's all kinds of opinions and people applying moral lenses to it. And in fact, it's, in Canada, we've had widespread access to gambling for 40 years. There is a normalization of this out there. From our generation, Steve, is where there weren't casinos in the province. There may have been a lottery that came to life, and we have online, and now online gambling is a different delivery channel for those games. And I've talked about some of this too, is that we're also a product on the internet and on mobile devices. But in the age of digital addiction, which is a serious concern for a lot of people, we are one player. We aren't,
right.
There's others that are probably doing a much better job making people pick up their phone or not put it down. But we are a product in that as well. And that's something I think we've been quite clear in as an industry, that yes, we understand our role and we're there and we're looking for rules and standards and tools that will help people. Probably so many more than many other people that have products on mobile devices and on the internet. And so, but in the context of that, that's what we have to understand, how we fit into that in the role we need to play. But it's frustrating at times because it's this assumption that you know we design games to be addictive. We design them to be entertaining, and because it's an entertainment product. And so those are some of the things that that there's people apply this moral lens, as I like to say, to the industry, and that's unfortunate because it gets in the way of productive discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to remind our listeners of my vintage, but I think my strongest ties to gambling are the Ontario program back in the early '70s. And Paul, I'm sure you remember this too, and all the arenas that were built across Ontario off the backs of selling lottery tickets. And here we are, what, 40, 50 years later, and for me, that's still, that's the one thing that resonates about what the gambling
Well,
industry has done.
and I give you one more is that Hockey Night in Canada was owned by Molson Brewery for a better part of a decade.
Right. Yep.
It was Molson Hockey Night in Canada for a better part of the decade.
Yeah. And just think,
And
decades of tobacco sponsorship of sports and cultural events, right?
right, but the point is in that there's, and this is where I don't even accept some of the, especially the comparison to smoking. As I said to one senator, no one ever said smoking 3 cigarettes a day is fine for you.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who will spend $25 a week playing lottery or betting on sports or doing something, and it's quite fun, quite healthy, and it's entertainment. And that's what they're choosing. And what, and I think the conversation needs to evolve, and that's where the disappointing part is. Some of the strong media voices in our country aren't doing probably as much as they should. It's part of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how I don't know if it's a case of you and other members of the CGA appearing in front of editorial boards or whatever, but I agree. And again, and someone in defense of traditional media, to me, is part and parcel again of a shrinking media industry where reporters, where beats have kind of, for the most part, with a few exceptions, have basically disappeared. And there just isn't that opportunity for reporters to have that learning curve and dig into an industry and build those relationships and also learn the ins and outs. So again, I don't want to be too I don't want to be too harsh with the industry here because there are issues right now. Hey, but before I let you go,
Mhm.
I do want to get into this. This story flew under the radar a little bit. I just wanted to get you to explain to our audience what this means, and that's the Doug Ford government passing or giving royal assent to Bill 216 back on November 6th, and that which effectively ends a relationship between, or I guess the parent-child relationship between the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario and iGaming Ontario. And with that bill's passing, Doug Downey, the Attorney General of Ontario, said that it effectively gives iGO a lot more, strengthens their governance and accountability structure in the market here. Any other thoughts on that, Paul?
No, I mean that was when um, Ontario created, with the most recent cabinet shuffle, the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Gaming. It was a good sign for our industry, and partly from having, and then the government desire to put the gaming operating agencies, conductors and managers, as they refer to, iGO and OLG, under the same roof. I think it began to, what I hope to see is more of a comprehensive approach to gaming from the province when it comes to. I ask this question a lot of politicians. Why are you in the gaming business as a province? What are your objectives? And Ontario's objectives have kind of run a gamut of years, but there's been three that have been fairly consistent. Was obviously providing revenue for province and programs. But two was economic development. When Ontario went into the casino business, wasn't by accident that a lot of the initial casinos in the province of Ontario were all built on borders, um, and using them as economic development tools. And also, and what's always been part of it is consumer protection. So in those three is weighting how you want to, what emphasis do you put on those? And I think with iGO being moved into this ministry, there's more of an understanding of the industry of which it supports and is there for, because it's not like, oh well, gee, it's not an operating agency. It's not. It doesn't sell to. It has no B2C relationship.
Right.
Um, so it's there as a steward for an industry in the province that produces some pretty good tax revenue for the province, but also is creating jobs and creating other economic opportunity. And I think that's the point, the emphasis where I think they may have some opportunity now to um, have more flexibility and more opportunity to participate, because we've got a great digital infrastructure, great technology talent in this province. Many of the operators that are here with offices have tapped into internship programs and co-op programs with universities to access talent. That depth of breadth is great. There's other programs, the digital development tax credits and other pieces that industry has been taking advantage of long before even Ontario got around to regulating. Those are all now you can kind of start to coordinate a little bit this more and understanding that iGO's there to nurture an industry, promote it, and sometimes, if need be, protect it from government. Um, because those are the kinds of things that I think that you get into understanding the role of land-based gaming and what it's doing in the communities. It pays great, good-paying jobs in our industry. There happen to be a lot of smaller, middle-sized rural communities across this country where those jobs are really important to those communities, and they're good-paying jobs, and they're not easily replaced. And so, understanding the economic impacts that the industry has in those communities is important. And I think this is a chance, and Minister Cho was a great advocate for the industry because he was parliamentary assistant to the finance minister during the consultations on iGaming. He comes at it with a great depth of knowledge already, which is terrific. And having that kind of advocate around the government table is going to be important for our industry. And I think and we've seen it in other jurisdictions where that's happened, and that there's some ministers that take interest and focus. And gaming isn't always one of the top issues governments want to deal with, and that's one of the things that they have a challenge with. When you get their attention and they've put their mind to doing something, is you make sure you keep it there and we get it done. And that's important because that's where Ontario has been a great champion in the last several years. And Doug Downey, the premier, and Stan Cho have been a big part of that. And that hasn't come along. I've been around 20 some odd years around the gaming business and politics, and you don't often get that attention. And there's very few occasions when that has come to pass. And when it does, it's important. And the fact that they're thinking forward about the future was important. So it's nice to see the legislation was a housekeeping item and simply to change its reporting authority to a different ministry, and now we'll see where they go from here. And obviously, with Martha retiring, there's a change in leadership at iGO, and we'll see what happens.
It's a great segue to my last question, Paul. And iGO did announce back in June that Martha Otten would be stepping down, retiring as executive director at the end of the year, which is about I guess 6 weeks away. There is a search recruiting firm under the auspices of the iGO board now looking for her successor. The title isn't going to be executive director; it will be president and chief executive officer, like yours. In your eyes, Paul, like what should the skill set be for that job moving forward? And again, I think it's going to be a different role than what Martha had. Martha did an incredible job, I think, in getting this market launched on a very small window in April 2022. But what skill set should her successor possess?
Well, I think it comes with the need for an understanding of the industry, first and foremost. We've seen some of these searches and people, with CEOs for lottery corporations and other things, and it's like you don't really need game experience. Like that's always been one that's they kind of shove it down the list. I'm like, hang on a second, that's really what the core business is, and that's important because from that you then understand what the stakeholder group you're dealing with is understand how they do business. Yes, people can learn it and all the rest, but also it's going to be in terms of understanding its new mandate and that relationship with and how it will build that with the minister. Because I think there's a lot of that still a TBD, shall we say, because it's the newness of just arriving at the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Gaming, and what that will the minister will want that agency to the primary role. But as I talked about around the ability of nurturing in that industry and being able to be an advocate for it, and because it does, like other industries, whether it's other technology sectors or other resource industries in this province, that it's a sector of an industry in the province and produces tax revenue for government, and is subject to regulation and oversight, and making sure that all of that works in a fair, balanced way that meets the objectives of the province, which in this case is around consumer protection measures, but also then the economic benefits flowing to the province of Ontario. And that doesn't necessarily mean the government's coffers directly. It means in creating jobs and opportunities. And so I think they'll have more role to say in that, but also taking the organization to the next step. There'll be the contract with operators is up in 2027. I think that there's a great opportunity to learn from the first 5 years, even now the first 3 years, as you begin to look at this contract and do what do you need to do? What can we change? What can we do better? What do we need to do differently? And I think that's going to be a really important first test for whoever takes on this. In fact, that contract is coming, and wanting to make sure that what has been created continues and continue to thrive and survive and be a strong economic player in the province. And so I think that's going to be key for whoever takes on. But I have I tend to lean to someone who should understand the gaming business, because that sometimes isn't the case, and that takes a while to figure out, and that you lose some traction and time for an organization as leadership gets up to speed that they may not have.
Paul Burns is the president and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. Paul, I know your AGM is coming up in a few weeks, so hopefully we can get you on before the end of 2024 and have a conversation with you after the annual general meeting. But you're always so generous with your time, and appreciate you tackling all these issues. And we wish you and Amanda Brewer and everybody else at the CGA well with your AGM, and looking ahead to what I expect will be a very busy 2025.
Yes, it will. Lots to do. So thanks again, Steve. I appreciate it and always enjoy being with you.
That's it for this edition of the Gaming News Canada show. You can find us at gamingnewscanada.ca and on the various and sundry podcast platforms. Again, thanks so much to Paul Burns from the Canadian Gaming Association for being with us today, and we will see everybody again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.